San Marcos, California, Tuesday, 11th September 2001, 6:42 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I remember the exact time because my first image of that day was looking at the clock radio on my nightstand, and like every other image from that day, it's burned indelibly into my subconscious. And it was also a memorable moment because it's not every morning that your spouse shakes you awake with the words, "Honey, get up, we're under attack." Lady Curmudgeon was running a home daycare back in those days, and she had just been informed of the events in New York City from one of the parents who was dropping off their kid and had just heard about it on the radio. So my September 11th begins 56 minutes after American Airlines Flight 11 struck One World Trade Center, and 41 minutes after Two World Trade Center was hit by United Flight 175. So all either of us knew at this point was that both towers of the Trade Center had been struck by aircraft. She exits the bedroom after waking me up and apprising me of what little she knew, and myself still in a half-asleep stupor, I immediately turn on the television, but now I'm really confused because the image that greets me is of the Pentagon on fire. The Pentagon? I thought it was the World Trade Center that got attacked. But in the 5 minutes since we had first heard about the Trade Center, the Pentagon happened. And the first news channel I switched on had just cut away from New York over to Washington as soon as they had a live shot of the Pentagon on fire. So I don't see a live shot of the Trade Center until 6:59 our time, and the shot I see has one of the towers visible, but there's a big cloud of dust and smoke right next to it. And the news anchors who are talking on the air, they're trying to ascertain what just happened while they were on the live shot from the Pentagon. I hear somebody say, "We're hearing reports that there's been a partial collapse of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. It takes another 5 or 10 minutes for the smoke to clear sufficiently so that we can see the entire building, the tallest building in New York City, has collapsed into rubble." Immediately on the heels of this, they switch briefly to a live shot from rural Pennsylvania where reports are indicating that a passenger airliner, which of course turns out to be United Flight 93, has crashed into the ground. On any other day of the year, this is the type of thing that would be getting wall-to-wall news coverage. But on this day, it's only the fourth biggest calamity to happen in the last hour and a half. They switched back to New York just in time for the second tower, the North Tower, to collapse in similar fashion as the first. Now, people who were not old enough to have been alive at the time who are too young to remember don't fully appreciate that this was 6 cataclysmic events happening in rapid-fire succession. You had both World Trade Towers getting struck, both of them collapsing. You had the Pentagon, and you had Shanksville. It was so much, it was impossible to even take it all in. And nobody even knew when the end was going to come, or if this was all of it. How many planes are there? Is this a precursor to some sort of invasion? Are we in World War III? It was only 46 minutes between the time I was woken up and the time the second tower fell, and the world was changed forever. Lady Curmudgeon was in the living room tending to the daycare kids. I'm still sitting on the edge of the bed trying to process the images that keep flooding in, but she comes into the bedroom at one point. I think it was after the first tower had fallen, and she just says, "What do we do?" And I make the silly mistake of thinking that she's asking that question in the geopolitical sense. So I start saying, "Well, we're clearly at war now. We just have to find out who's responsible." And she interrupts me and says, "No, idiot. I mean, what do we do, our family, right now, today?" And this is the first time it had even occurred to me that I was supposed to be getting dressed and leaving for work. So I said, "We're all staying here. I am not going to work. The kid's not going to school. We have no idea what's happening or when it will be over or if it's over. So we are hunkering down." And so hunker down we did. We had many conversations that day and in the following days about what the impact of these events would be on the country, on its people, on our culture, our economy, and all that stuff. And I remember one of those conversations had to do with how long it would take us to forget. She was of a mind that it would never happen, that it would always be in the forefront of the national memory, but I took a more cynical view. I said, 20 years tops. Because in 20 years from now, half the adults in the country won't have any recollection of these events. It'll be just another thing that you hear your parents talk about or that you learned about in history class, but that'll be it. And I would have preferred, frankly, to have been less correct in that prognostication. But online video is a wonderful historical resource. So for people who weren't alive or who don't remember, I would highly advise taking the time, and why not do it tomorrow on the 20th anniversary, to go back and watch the raw news feeds from that day. They are all available right here on YouTube. Some of them are up to 8 hours long, and I don't think I have ever let 3 years go by in these 2 decades without making myself sit and watch the whole thing over again, because I damn well don't ever want to forget what it was like to live through that day. When we allow the memories to fade, or when we fail to adequately pass them on to the younger generations, then the lessons we learned can all get unlearned in a big freaking hurry. And I think we're closer to falling over that precipice than we ever ought to be. So let's have a silent open tonight for all the people we lost that day and for all of their survivors who continue to cherish the memory of their loved ones who were taken away by radical Islamic terrorists. And if I'm not supposed to use that nomenclature because it upsets somebody's woke snowflake sensibilities, then tough fucking shit. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we started flying a Gadsden flag the week after 9/11, and we shall continue flying it, and anybody who doesn't like it is welcome to eat a giant bag of dicks. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And I bet you already have a pretty good idea what we're talking about tonight. For yesterday, we heard the most shockingly, horrifyingly un-American address that has ever been delivered by an American president. And when you're living in a Joe Biden presidency, that is really saying something. And did you notice how what we got yesterday was sort of a weird hybrid synthesis of mumbly, sleepy, punch-drunk Joe and angry, cranky, screaming, yelling Joe? It's like his people can't decide which revoltingly unlikable persona works better, so they decided to just combine the two and see what happens. Now, if you felt a strange sensation in your gut while you were listening to the U.S. president declaring open war on something like 100 million of his own citizens, let me tell you what that sensation was. It was the feeling of what it's like to live in a third world tin pot authoritarian dictatorship. Because make no mistake, that is what we are now. At the top, we have a strongman president. And yes, I am deeply hesitant to use the word strong when referring to President Corpsey Cadaverton, but for the life of me, I couldn't think of a better synonym, so please bear with me, who rules exclusively by executive decree. We have a bicameral legislature that, in theory at least, is supposed to be where our laws come from, but which in reality only exists as a rubber stamp to create the illusion of democracy and to confer a veneer of false legitimacy upon the wildly illegal, brazenly unconstitutional orders of the ruling regime. And we have a Supreme Court whose commitment to our founding legal charter extends only so far as any judgment that might cause them to stop getting invited to all the most fashionable dinner parties in the capital city. First thing is first. There is no version of this thing where we can obey our way out of it and magically get our old way of life back. If you were under any illusions about that, then yesterday should have dispelled them once and for all. The biggest mistake we ever made, and some of us were trying to warn about it at the time, was in conferring the benefit of the doubt on our public health authorities and assuming that they were operating in good faith and just wanted to get us through the pandemic. And then they would recede back into the woodwork and go on about their little bureaucratic lives and give us all our freedom back. They never warranted that courtesy or that good faith because they were never operating in good faith, and they are not even public health professionals. They are social engineers and party functionaries. I know we probably have some new viewers for this episode tonight, so let me explain the difference again between public health professionals and social engineers. Public health professionals are in the business of disseminating honest, truthful information about matters of public health. so as to assist the citizenry in making well-informed decisions about themselves and their own health. Public health professionals value hard data and legitimate scientific inquiry. Social engineers, on the other hand, are just trying to produce a certain behavioral response. To the social engineer, no amount of lying or deception or obfuscation or cudgeling is unwarranted or out of bounds so long as it produces that desired behavioral response. That is why people like Grand Ayatollah Anthony Fauci lie to you all the time about everything, and then, when they get busted lying, they lie about ever having lied in the first place. So, if you think your employer is going to save you from this edict, think again, because they won't. If you think your state's Republican governor is going to save you from it, think again, because they won't. If you think the Supreme Court's going to step in and save you, they won't. And even if they tried, has this administration shown any compunction thus far about telling the Supreme Court to go get fucked and going right ahead and doing the illegal thing anyway? If you think the Constitution is going to save you, stop being so goddamn naive. The Constitution has about as much meaning as a bubblegum wrapper at this point. It's just a few dusty old scraps of parchment that tourists like to look at on the rare occasion when they are allowed to enter the nation's capital and freely walk around the buildings that they own. Now, if you're trying to make sense out of the nonsensical rambling load of bullshit we heard from the corpse of Joe Biden yesterday, wherein he literally was contradicting himself from one sentence to the next, there's something you need to understand about Democrats. Democrats do not lift a finger. Democrats don't do anything unless they think it increases the likelihood of Democrats winning elections. The country doing well, its people doing well, is not something that ever remotely enters into their thinking. They will happily wreck the entire country every single way it can be wrecked if they think it gives their side an electoral leg up. If you want the country and its people to do well, to be safe and secure and prosperous, you don't throw open the borders and pack as many foreigners into the country as you possibly can. You don't leave American women and children behind in Afghanistan, subject to all the predations of 8th century barbarian savage goat fornicators, while choosing instead to evacuate convicted rapists and guys on terrorist watch lists. They do these things because it's been part of Democrat Party orthodoxy for 50 years now that maximizing immigration, any immigration, all immigration, creates a political dividend for their party. The Americans who lose their jobs, who have their wages depressed, who die of drug overdoses in their hundreds of thousands, who get robbed and raped and murdered and marginalized, they're just collateral damage. A small price to pay if it moves us closer to wielding inscrutable political power. People like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi have no problem climbing over a mountain of dead Americans if they see the thing they want over on the other side. So when they pretend to care about your health and safety and the welfare of your family, they are lying. Stop believing them. They hate you. So this newest power grab has to be viewed first through the lens of electoral politics, because that is the only way the Democrats view anything. They are wagering on the notion that the people in the country who are still unvaccinated are overwhelmingly more likely to be Republicans or Trump supporters, which is why they've chosen to demonize those people and turn them into social pariahs. When you hear the word unvaccinated, Joe Biden and the Democrats want you to think Trump supporters. They want the two things to be synonymous in the public consciousness. If this really had anything to do with safety and public health, would these people be bending over backward to pretend acquired immunity doesn't exist? I said the forbidden words. You can't talk about that, you monstrous conspiracy theorist. I want this video pulled down immediately. Saying acquired immunity in Joe Biden's America is like saying Voldemort in the Harry Potter universe. This aggression shall not stand. And why are we not allowed to talk about acquired immunity again? Why do we have to get our scientific data on that topic from Israel? Because the U.S. government has effectively shut down all scientific inquiry into things they don't want to talk about? Because this is social engineering and not public health. Are you catching on yet? If we talk about acquired immunity, then people might be disinclined toward the servile obedience that we're trying so hard to promote. They want servile obedience to be the new American way of life. In Joe Biden's America, you only have two options: servile obedience or unemployment and marginalization. What, you thought you were living in a self-governing liberal democracy where the job of the state is to safeguard the people's liberties? How quaint! How very 18th century! We are right now living in the Gilded Age on steroids. You remember the Gilded Age. It was that period between about 1885 and 1900 when the industrialists and the trusts and the robber barons wielded all the real power. When they were the ones who chose the presidents and the governors and the senators. And when there was a citizen or a group of citizens that needed to be silenced and deplatformed, then the tycoons and their hand-picked presidents and governors made sure it got done. Nothing is new under the sun, not even in the digital social media age. The only difference now is that the industrial tycoons live in Silicon Valley, where they wield far more power than they did 130 years ago, and the commodity in which they deal is information, rather than steel and railroads. The corpse of Joe Biden is the president right now because that's who the big tech oligarchs selected to be the president. 120 years ago, we also had a president who was handpicked by the industrialist oligarchs of their day to be their man on the inside in Washington, and his name was William McKinley. But they never bargained on McKinley getting assassinated by a crazed anarchist in Buffalo, New York in 1901, shortly after the start of his second term. The vice president at that time, a guy named Theodore Roosevelt, was in the vice presidency because his own party couldn't stand him. He was a threat to the interests of the big tech oligarchs of the day, and they figured sticking him in a powerless, meaningless post like vice president would be a good way of sidelining him so he wouldn't cause any trouble and be bad for business. But then all of a sudden, the guy they were most afraid of suddenly became the president, and he proceeded to do all the things that they feared he might. He broke up their trusts, dismantled their monopolies, and returned the country to being a place where the individual citizen and the small businessman are the guys with the power, because that's the country that our founders founded. Fast forward to this century, and all the same kinds of people were afraid of Donald Trump for all the same reasons. But unlike Theodore Roosevelt, Trump gained the presidency by damn well getting himself elected, even over the fervent objections of his own party, and that made him an even bigger threat. What? This guy thinks he can govern as a populist just because the people wanted him for their president? Of all the nerve, who the hell does this guy think he is? We live in a rigged system, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a rigged system for a hell of a long time. Each time the people get the crazy idea of trying to unrig it and to elect a president who wants to unrig it, the wealthy, powerful coastal elites treat those people and that president as a cancerous tumor that must be gotten rid of by absolutely any means necessary. Because if there's one thing you're never allowed to do in the United States, it's to derail somebody else's gravy train. But we have never, not even in the height of the Gilded Age, arrived at such a place of unvarnished, undemocratic authoritarianism as we arrived at yesterday with that horrifying speech by President Gropin' Joe Biden. So let's close tonight by going over a few self-evident facts that nobody should ever forget. Number one, in the United States of America, we do not force people to undergo medical treatments they don't want. Number two, you do not owe any stupid bastard any explanation for why you don't want to get the vaccine. Number three, you cannot be compelled to submit your private medical records for inspection as a condition of keeping your job or entering a public venue or any damn other thing. But unfortunately, in allowing those who would tyrannize us to get the ball this close to the goal line, we only have one means of recourse remaining if we want to get our rights and our liberties and our way of life and our country back. So that's why I am proposing that it is time for a general strike by the American working men and women. We've never really had a general strike in this country before. It's a commonplace thing over in Europe. They've done it over a hell of a lot less than this. And it usually does achieve the desired end. A few years ago in France, they had a general strike because they didn't want the work week raised from 36 to 38 hours. But you know what happened? the people got what they wanted. When our elite ruling class overlords lay around at home in their jammies all day, doing a couple Zoom calls, still getting paid their fabulous high six-figure salaries, getting everything they want delivered to their doorstep within a couple hours, who are the people who make that happen? Who are the people who build and maintain the wonderfully luxurious homes in which they live? That is you and me, my friend. We are the people who keep the wheels of commerce turning. The only voice we have left, the only thing we can do to confound the people who seek to oppress and marginalize us and turn us into social pariahs is to put down our tools and walk off the job. And we're not picking those tools back up until all of this crap is over. That means no goddamn vax mandates, no goddamn mask mandates, no more obedience muzzles on our kids in school. It all goes. We are exercising our right of popular sovereignty because it is our right to exercise. Because we are taking our lives back by force. You assholes in Washington think you're the only ones who know how to play hardball? We will show you how hardball is played, and you won't like it one damn bit. So I hope you've got a big enough goon squad to throw all of our asses in jail, but here's a pro tip. You don't. Thanks for watching. Have a pleasant weekend. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.